The day my parents stood up in front of 200 people and pointed at my sister like she hung the moon, I was sitting 3 tables away, eating rubber chicken and pretending I didn't exist, which, honestly, had been my full-time job for about 26 years. My name is Ryan Calloway. I grew up in a small town called Millbrook, Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, your business, and exactly how much your family thinks of you. And in the Calloway house, the math was real simple. There was my sister, Madison, and then there was everyone else, which, in practical terms, meant me. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I'm not telling you this story because I want your sympathy. I'm telling you this story because what happened last April at the Riverside Banquet Hall in Columbus, Ohio, is the kind of thing that doesn't feel real, even when you lived through every single second of it. And because somewhere out there, there's somebody sitting at a dinner table right now, invisible to the people who are supposed to love them most. And I want that person to know that silence is not the same thing as surrender. But let me back up. Let me take you all the way back, because this story doesn't make sense unless you understand where it started. I was 7 years old the first time I understood that I was different from my sister in my parents' eyes. Not different like unique, different like less. Madison was 9. She had just won the regional spelling bee, and my mum had literally cried. Happy tears, the kind she saved for church and Christmas morning. My dad had lifted Madison up off the ground and swung her around in the kitchen and said, "That's my girl. That is my girl. Right there." I had gotten a perfect score on my math test that same week. I remember putting it on the refrigerator myself, using the little Apple magnet. I remember waiting. Nobody said anything. My mum moved it to the side when she needed to write a grocery list on the notepad behind it. I don't think she ever actually saw it. That's not a dramatic story. That's not abuse. That's just a quiet, slow kind of invisibility that you don't even have a name for when you're 7. You just feel it in your chest, this hollow little ache. And you think maybe you did something wrong. Maybe you need to try harder. Maybe next time they'll notice. I kept thinking that for about 19 more years. Madison was, by every measurable standard, the family's golden child. She was pretty in that classic, effortless way. Good at school without seeming to try. Charming at family dinners, in a way that made aunts and uncles reach for her cheeks. She ran track in high school, got a scholarship to Ohio State, graduated with honours, and walked straight into a marketing job at a mid-sized firm in Columbus. My parents talked about her the way people talk about a sunrise. Like she was something that just happened perfectly, and they were lucky to witness it. I was the kid who took things apart to see how they worked. I was the kid who stayed up until 2 a.m, reading about operating systems when I was 14. I was the kid who built a functional Wi-Fi router from spare parts in 8th grade because ours kept cutting out, and my dad said we couldn't afford a new one. He used that router for 3 years. He never once asked me how I made it. I wasn't bad at school. I wasn't a troublemaker. I wasn't the kind of kid who demanded attention by acting out. I was just quiet. And in my family, quiet meant unimportant. Madison filled every room she walked into. I faded into the wallpaper. That was just how it was. When I was 17, I told my parents I wanted to study computer science. My dad looked at me like I'd suggested moving to Mars. He said, and I remember this word for word, because it carved itself into me like an initial in a tree. "That's a lonely career for lonely people, Ryan. You sure that's what you want?" My mum didn't say anything. She was refilling Madison's water glass. I said yes, that was what I wanted. My dad shrugged, said okay. That was the whole conversation. Madison's college send-off was a backyard party with 30 people, a catered taco bar, and a hand-painted banner that said, "Our star is rising." My mum made a speech that lasted 12 minutes. I timed it because I was bored and a little bit heartbroken, and timing things was something I did when I needed to feel in control of something. When I left for college 2 years later, my mum handed me a Tupperware of snickerdoodles at the door and told me to drive safe. My dad was watching football. He waved from the couch without looking up. I drove 4 hours to Cincinnati with a Tupperware of cookies and enough quiet anger in my chest to fuel a small engine. But here's the thing about that anger. I didn't let it make me bitter. I let it make me focused. Because I had figured something out by then. I'd figured out that I was never going to get what I needed from my parents by asking for it. I was never going to earn it by being good or being smart or being present. The game was rigged and I'd been playing it wrong. So I stopped playing it. I threw myself into school the way some people throw themselves into a religion. Computer science, then a minor in business, then every elective that touched on systems and networks and emerging technology. I got an internship my sophomore year at a small tech startup in Cincinnati called Loopline. They built workflow automation software. Niche stuff. But the founder, a guy named Derek Chen, was one of those rare people who looks at a 20-year-old kid and actually sees what's there instead of what's not. He gave me real work, problems that mattered, and I solved them. I graduated in 3 years instead of 4. I didn't tell my family I was doing it. I just did it. I walked across that stage in front of nobody I knew, and it was fine. I was fine. I had already accepted an offer from a firm in Austin by then, a cybersecurity consulting company called Vantara Solutions. Entry level, but with room. There was a lot of room. Those first 2 years in Austin were the loneliest and the most alive I'd ever felt at the same time. I had a 1-bedroom apartment with a second-hand couch and a monitor setup that cost more than my monthly rent. I worked 12-hour days and then came home and kept working, not because anyone told me to, because I genuinely loved it, because for the first time in my life, I was in a place where being quiet and being sharp were the same thing, where the work spoke for itself and nobody needed me to perform. I called home once a month. The calls were short. My mum would tell me what Madison was doing. A promotion, a new apartment, a guy she was seeing named Brandon who had great teeth and played golf. My dad would ask if I was eating enough. I would say yes. We would hang up. That was our relationship. I want to be honest with you about something. There were nights in that apartment in Austin when I sat in the dark and felt something I can only describe as grief. Not for what I had lost, because you can't lose something you never really had, but for the version of me that kept hoping. The 7-year-old with the math test and the Apple magnet. I was grieving him. I was letting him go. And it hurt in a way I didn't have words for. But morning always came. And with it, the work. And the work was good. By the time I was 25, I was no longer entry level at anything. I had led 3 major infrastructure security overhauls for clients whose names you would recognise. I had a team of 11 people under me. I had been written up in a trade publication, one of those niche industry things nobody outside the field reads, but still. I existed on paper. I was real. I still didn't tell my parents. Not in any meaningful way. When my mum asked how work was going, I said fine. Because fine was a wall, and I had learned to love my walls. Then came the phone call that changed everything. And I mean that literally. My entire life split into a before and an after. And the split happened on a Tuesday afternoon in February, while I was eating a breakfast burrito at my desk. The call was from a man named Gerald Harmon. The name might not mean anything to you, but in the world I operated in, Gerald Harmon was not a small name. He was the founder and CEO of Harmon Integrated Systems, which was one of the fastest growing enterprise software companies in the country. They had just landed a Department of Defense contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They needed a new head of cybersecurity infrastructure, someone who could build the whole system from the ground up, someone who could think architecturally and move fast and didn't mind pressure. Gerald had gotten my name from Derek Chen, my old boss from the internship. Derek had told him, apparently, that I was the best problem solver he had ever worked with, and that whoever hired me full-time was going to wonder how they ever operated without me. I almost dropped my burrito. Gerald and I talked for 2 hours on that first call, then again 2 days later. Then he flew me out to the company headquarters in Columbus, Ohio, which, yes, was the same city where my parents lived. And yes, the irony was not lost on me. And I met the team and walked the building and sat in a conference room with glass walls and a view of the Scioto River, and Gerald Harmon looked at me across a table and said, "I've interviewed 23 people for this role. You're the only one I want." The offer he put in front of me had a lot of zeros, a number that made my vision go a little blurry at the edges. Equity, a signing bonus, the title of Chief Security Officer. I was 26 years old. I took the job. Of course I took the job, but I did something else too, something that I had been unconsciously setting up without even realizing it. I decided not to tell my family. Not yet. I moved back to Ohio, rented a nice apartment downtown, and let my parents believe I was still grinding away at my mid-level consulting job in Austin. I wasn't lying. I just wasn't updating the picture. There's a difference, and I had a reason. I was waiting to see if they would ask. They didn't ask. Months passed. I settled into the new role. I rebuilt the security infrastructure at Harman from almost nothing, working 18-hour days for 3 months straight, running on coffee, and the particular satisfaction of watching a system you designed start to breathe and function like a living thing. Gerald trusted me with more and more. We started talking like colleagues, like friends even. Meanwhile, back in Millbrook, a plan was being made without my knowledge. My parents were organising what they called a family appreciation dinner, a formal event at the Riverside Banquet Hall in Columbus, the kind of venue you rent for wedding receptions and retirement parties. The whole extended family was invited. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends who had known us since we were kids. 200 people. A catered dinner. A slideshow. The official reason, I was told in a group text, was to celebrate the family's achievements. My Aunt Linda was retiring. My cousin had just had a baby. And Madison, my mother wrote with what I could practically feel was a string of invisible exclamation points, had just made partner at her marketing firm. I was invited, it seemed, as an afterthought. My name appeared at the bottom of the guest list my mum forwarded to the family, right between Uncle Gary and someone I didn't recognise. I confirmed I was coming. Nobody responded to my confirmation. I drove to that dinner from my downtown apartment in a car that my parents didn't know I owned. A black Audi A6. I had paid for it in cash at a dealership 3 weeks after my first paycheck from Harman cleared. I parked on the street and walked in wearing a suit that fit better than anything I had ever worn in my life, and I found my name card and I sat down at a table near the back. My mother hugged me at the door. She said, "You look thin." My dad shook my hand and asked if I was doing okay. I said yes. They moved on to greet someone else before I'd finished the word. I want to pause here and tell you what the room looked like, because the room matters. The Riverside Banquet Hall is a beautiful space. High ceilings, warm lighting, round tables with white tablecloths, and small floral centerpieces. A stage at the far end with a podium and a microphone. A projection screen behind it. It smelled like flowers and candle wax and the particular anxiety of formal events. There were people I recognised everywhere. People who had watched me grow up. People who had attended my sister's spelling bee and her graduation party, and who now mingled with wine glasses and laughed at things I couldn't hear from the back of the room. Madison was holding court near the stage. She was wearing a red dress and she looked genuinely happy, lit up from the inside. And I want to say something here that might surprise you. I didn't hate my sister. I want to be really clear about that. Madison wasn't the villain of my story. She never chose to be the favourite. She never rubbed it in my face, never deliberately excluded me. She was just the one they chose to see. The cruelty wasn't hers. It was invisible and systemic, and it belonged to the adults in the room. Still, she was wearing red, and I was at a table near the back. Dinner was served. I ate my rubber chicken and listened to the table conversations around me. An uncle I barely knew asked what I was up to these days. I said tech stuff, still in Columbus now. He nodded and turned back to his own conversation. That was the entire exchange. Then the program started. My dad went up first. He's a big man, my father. Broad-shouldered with grey at his temples now. He looks like somebody's idea of a reliable American dad, and when he's standing at a podium, he commands a room. He always has. He talked about the family, about hard work and values, about how proud he was to have so many good people in one room. The crowd responded warmly. He was good at this. He always had been. Then he started talking about Madison. I watched the projection screen fill with photographs. Madison at her college graduation, standing between my parents, both of them beaming. Madison at her firm's launch party, her name on a press release. Madison accepting some kind of regional marketing award, holding a plaque, looking exactly like somebody who would hold a plaque. My dad's voice was thick with pride. He called her a beacon. He said she was proof that the Callaway name meant something. He said, and here's the part that still lives in my chest like a splinter. Madison is the best thing this family has ever produced. 200 people applauded. I sat very still. I held my fork. I breathed through my nose. The woman next to me, one of my mother's book club friends, leaned over and whispered, "She's just remarkable, isn't she?" I said yes, she really is. My mother spoke next. She talked about watching Madison grow up, about always knowing she was special, about the day Madison was born, and how my mother had held her and felt, in her words, like God had given me the greatest gift. She cried a little. Actual tears. She dabbed them with the corner of a cloth napkin. The room was utterly silent, the way rooms get when they're moved by something. Not once. Not in either speech. Not in any slide on the projection screen. Not on any table centerpiece, or program booklet, or banner near the door. Was my name mentioned? Not once. I was there, I was in the room. I existed in physical space, inside that building, and I was completely, perfectly, professionally invisible. The applause when my mother finished was long and warm, and I let it happen around me like weather. And then a different kind of thing happened. A man entered from the side door of the banquet hall. He was about 60, silver-haired, wearing a navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. He moved with the kind of unhurried confidence that comes from decades of being the most important person in any room he walked into. One of the event staff rushed over and whispered something to him, and he nodded and made his way toward the stage. My mother saw him first. I watched her face change. I watched my father turn around. I watched both of them do the thing people do when someone unexpected and obviously significant walks in. That cocktail of confusion and instinctive social performance. Gerald Harmon walked up to the microphone. He smiled at the room the way you smile when you're about to enjoy yourself. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "My name is Gerald Harmon. Some of you might know the name. I'm the CEO of Harmon Integrated Systems." He paused just long enough to let that register. I saw a few people sit up straighter. "I was told this was a family celebration, and I'm here because I think the family might be missing someone in their celebration." The room was very quiet. Gerald looked out at the tables. "Found me." I had not moved. I was still holding my fork. "Ryan," he said, "would you come up here?" I want to tell you what happened in my body in that moment. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I had not planned this. I had not coordinated this with Gerald. I genuinely did not know he was going to be there. He told me later that he had found out about the dinner, decided, entirely on his own, that he wanted to do something, that he'd watched me work for months and felt like something wasn't adding up and wanted to understand the context I came from. What I felt in that moment was not triumph. What I felt was something quieter and stranger, like a door that had been closed for a very long time was about to open, and I wasn't sure yet if I wanted to walk through it. I put down my fork, I stood up, I walked to the stage. The room watched me in complete silence. I could see my mother's face. She'd gone the particular shade of pale. That means the brain is processing something faster than the body can respond. My father was absolutely still. Madison, still near the stage, was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Something that looked, honestly, like relief. I stepped up next to Gerald. He put a hand on my shoulder. "This young man," he said, "is the Chief Security Officer of Harmon Integrated Systems. He joined us 8 months ago. In that time, he has redesigned our entire security infrastructure from scratch, successfully defended against 2 major cyber attack attempts on a federal contract, built a team of 18 security engineers, and has quite literally protected the operational integrity of a program that serves national security interests." He paused. "He is without question the most talented professional I've worked with in 30 years of building companies." I looked out at 200 people and found my parents. My father's jaw was working silently, like he was trying to find a word in a language he didn't speak. My mother's eyes had filled. Not the same kind of tears as before. These were different. These were the kind that come when the world reshapes itself in front of you, and there's nothing to do but witness it. Gerald wasn't done. "I also want to mention," he said with the particular precision of a man who has given a lot of speeches, "that when I asked Ryan recently what kept him motivated, he said something that stayed with me. He said, 'I learned early that I was going to have to prove myself without anyone in my corner. So I made sure the work was the proof.'" Gerald looked at me. I thought that was worth noting. He handed me the microphone. I stood there for a moment. I didn't have a speech prepared. I hadn't rehearsed. I had nothing written down. I had no plan for this room or this moment, or the look on my mother's face. But I had 26 years of things I had never said, and they were all right there, patient and quiet, just waiting. I cleared my throat. "Thank you, Gerald," I said. My voice was steady. I was a little surprised by that. I grew up in this family. Most of you in this room watched me grow up. You came to Madison's spelling bees and her graduation parties. You asked about her at every family dinner I can remember. I paused. Not for effect, just because I needed a second. I don't think most of you did that on purpose. I don't think it was mean. I think I was just easy to overlook. The room was so quiet I could hear the AC running. I want to be honest about something. For a long time, I thought that was my fault, that I wasn't interesting enough, or loud enough, or impressive enough. I spent a lot of years trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. I stopped. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just wasn't being seen. I looked at my parents. Mum, Dad. My voice didn't break. I was proud of that. I'm not up here to embarrass you. I'm not up here to make you feel bad. I'm up here because a good man walked into this room and said my name out loud, and I realised I'd been waiting a long time for that. I took a breath. I moved back to Columbus 8 months ago, and I didn't tell you because I wanted to see if you'd notice, if you'd ask enough questions to find out. You didn't. And that's okay. I've made my peace with what we are and what we're not. My dad made a sound. I couldn't tell what kind of sound, something between a word and a breath. I'm proud of Madison, I said, and I meant it. She works hard. She's good at what she does. She deserves everything she has. This isn't about her. I looked out at the room. This is just me, finally saying out loud that I existed too, that I was there, that I worked just as hard, even when nobody was watching, especially when nobody was watching. I handed the microphone back to Gerald. I walked off the stage. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. I counted them. Then Madison started clapping. Just Madison. From her spot near the stage, in her red dress with tears on her face that she wasn't trying to hide. And then someone else. And then the whole room, slow at first, then fast, until it was the kind of applause that fills a space entirely, that you feel in your sternum. I sat back down at my table near the back. The woman from my mother's book club looked at me for a long moment. "You really are remarkable," she said. I said thank you. I meant that too. What happened after is harder to describe than what happened on the stage. The event sort of fell apart after that, in the way events do when something real intrudes on the carefully arranged version of things. People came to my table, cousins I hadn't talked to in years, aunts who seemed genuinely confused about why they hadn't known, an uncle who told me with what seemed like actual embarrassment that he'd had no idea and was sorry for it. My sister found me first of my actual family. She sat down across from me and she didn't say anything for a moment. Her eyes were still a little red. She put her hands flat on the table like she was steadying herself. "Ryan," she said. "I didn't know." "I know," I said. "I mean, I knew things were uneven, but I didn't know it was like this. I didn't know you were..." She stopped, tried again. "Why didn't you tell me?" "What would you have done?" I asked. Not meanly, genuinely. She thought about it. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe nothing, but I would have tried." "I know," I said again. And that was true. That was the honest truth. Madison wasn't the person I was talking to when I said what I said up at that microphone. She never was. We sat there for a minute, my sister and I, and something shifted between us. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a big moment, just a quiet recalibration, like two people looking at a map and finally agreeing on where they actually are. Then my parents came. My dad got there first. He pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down heavily, the way big men sit when they are carrying something they don't know how to set down. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at me. "CSO," he said. It wasn't really a question. "Yeah," I said. "At Harmon Integrated Systems." "Yeah." He was quiet. The muscle in his jaw jumped. "How long?" 8 months here, 6 years total in the field before that." He nodded slow, like he was calculating something, like he was going back through time and doing math he hadn't known he needed to do. "Ryan," he said, and then he stopped. And I watched my father, who was not a man who struggled for words, genuinely not be able to find any. And something in me, the part that had been a 7-year-old with an Apple magnet and a math test, just ached for him, for both of us, for the 26 years of talking past each other that had led to this moment. "You don't have to say anything," I told him. I want to, he said. I just. He shook his head. I didn't see you. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how I looked at my own kid and just. He put his hand over his mouth for a second. I'm sorry, son. I'm genuinely sorry. He said son. He said it the way I had always wanted to hear it, not as a footnote. As a person. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry, I think. Too full. I put my hand on his arm and I said, I know, Dad. My mum came and stood behind him. She was holding herself together with visible effort. She looked at me the way people look at something they realise they almost lost without ever knowing they were losing it. You live in Columbus, she said. You've been in Columbus and you didn't. I was waiting, I said. I was waiting for someone to ask. That landed. I watched it land. And my mother, who had cried picture-perfect tears for Madison 20 minutes ago, started crying a completely different kind of cry. The ugly, heaving kind. The kind you can't perform. I stood up and hugged her because she was my mother, and because whatever she had failed to give me, she had also given me a lot of things I didn't have language for, and because being right about someone doesn't mean you stop loving them. She held on for a long time. I let her. Gerald found me near the end of the night, when the event had dissolved into smaller conversations and most of the tables were half empty. He handed me a glass of water and stood next to me looking out at the room. I hope that was okay, he said. What I did? It was more than okay, I said. I meant what I said up there. Every word. I know you did. He was quiet for a moment. You know, when you told me that thing about proving yourself without anyone in your corner, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Nobody should have to do that, especially not someone with your capability. He shook his head. It's a waste of energy, building walls when you could be building things. I thought about that. About all the walls, all the years of self-protection, and contained expectations and disciplined invisibility. They weren't wasted, I said after a minute. The walls, I mean. They kept me moving when I had nothing else. Gerald nodded. Maybe so, he said. But you don't need them anymore. I drove home that night through downtown Columbus, past the lights on the river, past the buildings I helped protect, past the life I'd built in absolute silence, while everyone who was supposed to be watching was looking somewhere else. I sat in my apartment for a long time before I went to bed. I sat with a particular quiet that comes after something big. Not peace exactly. Not closure. Those words are too clean for what it was. It was something rawer and realer. It was the feeling of having been seen by strangers and family alike on the same night and surviving both. In the weeks after that dinner, things changed. Not perfectly. Not in a movie way where everyone sits down and says their truths and goes home transformed. It was messier than that. My dad called me the following Sunday. Just to call. Not for a reason. Just to talk. It was awkward and a little stilted and lasted 7 minutes, but he called. He's called every Sunday since. My mum asked if she could come see my apartment. I said yes. She stood in my living room looking at my monitor setup and the framed patent on the wall, a security protocol I had co-developed 2 years ago. And she was very quiet for a long time. Then she said, I didn't know you had a patent. And I said, you didn't ask. And she said, I'm asking now. And we sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours, and I told her about my life. Madison and I started texting. Real stuff, not just holiday check-ins. She sent me an article about cybersecurity trends, with a note that said, thinking of you, weirdly. I sent back a thumbs up and a laughing emoji. It was a start. And this is the thing I need you to hear, if you've stayed with me this long. The revenge in this story. And it is a revenge story. I won't pretend otherwise. The revenge wasn't Gerald's speech. It wasn't the look on my parents' faces. It wasn't the applause or the apologies or any single dramatic moment. The revenge was the 6 years of work I did when no one was watching. The revenge was the 18-person team I built. The revenge was the federal contract I protected. The revenge was the apartment with the river view, and the car I paid for in cash, and the patent on the wall. The revenge was that when the moment came, I had something real. Not a performance, not a carefully staged reveal. Just the actual, undeniable weight of a life I had built on my own terms. That's the part nobody can take from you. The work, the real work. The kind you do in the dark with no applause, with no one watching, because you believe in it even when you're the only one who does. If you're that kid right now, the one at the back table, eating rubber chicken, waiting for someone to say your name, I need you to hear this. You do not need their validation to build something real. You do not need their attention to become something worth paying attention to. The invisibility, as much as it hurts, can be fuel if you decide to let it be. Do the work, in the quiet, in the margins, with the doors closed and no one watching, because one day someone is going to walk into the room and say your name. And when they do, you want to have something to stand up for. I stood up, and it was enough.